Welcome to Unplugged, diving deep into what you care about. So, universal basic income. It's a hot topic, big news today, right?
Huge. It's like finally actual discussions about a real safety net, not just patching holes.
Exactly. This idea of just giving everyone enough to cover the essentials, food, housing, it's radical.
It is. But is it practical? Where does all that money come from?
Well, they're talking about different strategies. Taxation, obviously. Maybe reallocating some existing welfare funds. It's a big puzzle, right?
Oh, yeah. And then the potential impacts on the economy. Inflation, labor participation. We have to consider all these things.
For sure. That's why these pilot programs are so crucial, like the one in central Iowa with the $500 monthly payments.
Right? And the Coachella Valley one, focusing on immigrant families. Really interesting to see those different approaches.
It is, seeing how it actually plays out in real communities. And of course, Alaska's been doing something similar with their Permanent Fund Dividend for ages. Not a full UBI, but
it shows it can be done, at least on some level, and it gives researchers some data to work with to analyze the long-term effects, right?
precisely. They're looking at everything: economic stability, health outcomes, even how it affects people's jobs.
I'm curious about that, actually. Does it make people work less? I can see the argument both ways. More security could free people up to pursue other things, or they might just decide to work less.
That's one of the big questions, isn't it? One of those big unknowns. Some suggest a possible drop in overall hours worked, while others argue it doesn't change much, and some even suggesting possible higher productivity.
Makes sense. It's a complicated issue. And then there's the whole political side of things. Getting public and political support for something this big, that's a hurdle.
A major one, right? It all comes down to whether people believe it's a good idea, whether it's fair.
Yeah, and whether they understand it. There's so much misinformation out there. People hear free money and, it needs to be explained clearly how it works, the potential benefits, and to be realistic, also potential negative outcomes.
Absolutely. Education is key. That's what we're trying to do here, to some extent. Have these conversations, look at the evidence, and try to make sense of it all.
Exactly, because it has the potential to be truly transformative, but it's crucial to understand all aspects, both the pros and cons of UBI implementation.
So, universal basic income, huh? This idea of just handing out money to everyone, regardless of whether they work or not. It's a pretty radical concept. Where's the incentive to work if you're guaranteed a paycheck?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? The proponents argue UBI isn't about replacing work. It's about providing a safety net, a foundation so people can pursue education, start businesses, or, just not be constantly stressed about making ends meet.
Right, that's the idea. This article talks about economic empowerment, but doesn't it also create a disincentive to work? It mentioned a couple of pilot programs.
Yeah, like the one in central Iowa, $500 a month. And the Coachella Valley initiative, a bit less, but specifically targeting immigrant families. Those are yielding some interesting data.
Oh, data like what?
Well, they're looking at things like how UBI impacts health outcomes, whether it affects people's jobs, that kind of thing. And surprisingly, it seems like it doesn't necessarily discourage work.
Huh, that is surprising. I'd have thought, but I suppose if it's just enough to cover basic expenses, it's not exactly luxurious living.
Exactly. It's about affording essentials, not about getting rich. The article also mentions Alaska's Permanent Fund Dividend.
Right, that's been going on for years. Kind of a proto-UBI, I guess. Distributing some of the oil revenue. Shows it can be done, at least on a smaller scale. Still, scaling it up nationally, that's a whole other beast.
For sure. The funding question is huge. Where does all the money come from? Taxes? Reallocating existing welfare programs? That's a tough nut to crack.
So South Africa's political scene is pretty interesting right now, huh? Like big changes happening.
Yeah, huge. ANC losing its majority, that's a seismic shift. Big implications for everything, including, it seems, social safety nets.
It is. This whole universal basic income thing fascinating. They're seriously considering it?
Seems so. Turning the COVID relief grant into a full-blown UBI? Ambitious, to say the least. South Africa would be the first, right?
Exactly. A global precedent. Think about that. Everyone between 18 and 59 getting regular payments, no strings attached.
Right? Regardless of whether they work or not. I mean, that's a radical idea.
It is radical, but they argue it's about providing a foundation, not replacing work.
Yeah, I saw that. Economic empowerment. But it's a tough sell, isn't it? Convincing people it won't discourage work?
Totally. There's that inherent question, why work if you're getting a check anyway? But they're pointing to existing data, like from Kenya and those pandemic relief programs.
Oh, the Give Directly study. And things like the Spanish anti-poverty payments, the CARES Act in the U.S. Yeah, I mean, those showed some pretty interesting results. People weren't just sitting around doing nothing.
Right? They were using the money for essentials, starting businesses, improving their lives. And, the article mentions South Africa already has something similar, right? That social relief of distress grant.
The SRD, yeah, but it's means tested, right? Limited to those below the poverty line. This UBI would be for everyone. That's a massive expansion.
Huge. And the funding, where's that going to come from? That's the big question.
Isn't it? Taxes, reallocating funds. It'll be interesting to see how they propose to pay for it. And then there's the whole, political side of things. Getting this through, that's a hurdle.
So, this guaranteed basic income thing sounds great in theory, right? Lift people out of poverty, give them a safety net. But this article raises some red flags.
Yeah? Like what?
Well, this OpenResearch study, the ORUS one, it found that people receiving GBI were actually less likely to stay employed.
Oh, really? That's not what you'd expect.
Right? And their household income dropped too, like a couple $1,000s a year. So not exactly a recipe for financial independence.
Huh. I see. So less work, less income overall. That kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it?
Exactly. And they weren't using that extra time to get better jobs or learn new skills, mostly just leisure activities, apparently.
So the argument that GBI frees people up to pursue education or training doesn't really hold up then.
Doesn't seem like it, no. And it's not just the individuals receiving the payments. Their family members started working less too. So the whole household income takes a hit.
Wow, that's a pretty significant finding. It makes you wonder about the long-term effects, right? If it actually perpetuates dependence rather than, empowerment.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And the cost. They're talking trillions of dollars annually, more than Social Security and Medicare combined.
Trillions? Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow, especially if it's not having the intended effect. I mean, there are other programs like the SRD in South Africa that are struggling just to reach the people who need it most. And that's a much smaller scale.
Right? It makes you think twice about whether this is really the best way to address poverty. Maybe focusing on improving existing programs or targeted support for education and job training would be more effective.
Possibly. Or maybe a combination of approaches. It's a complex issue, for sure. Lots to consider. But these studies, they definitely raise some serious concerns about the potential downsides of GBI.
So these guaranteed basic income programs, they're getting a lot of attention, but some of these pilot programs are showing some unexpected results, right?
Yeah, like what?
Well, these programs in Wisconsin, Madison, and Milwaukee, they're seeing a drop in working hours among participants.
Oh, really? Less work? That's not great. Isn't the idea to empower people, not make them work less?
Exactly. And it's not like they're using the extra time for education or training either. It kind of mirrors that OpenResearch study, the ORUS one, where people receiving GBI worked less and their household income dropped.
Right. I remember that. So less work, less income overall, not exactly a winning formula. And Milwaukee's mayor is worried about the long-term costs too. It makes sense, right? How do you fund something like this indefinitely?
That's the big question. They're talking trillions annually for a national program. Trillions. More than Social Security and Medicare combined. Even targeted programs would be hundreds of billions.
Whoa, that's a lot of money. And if it's not even encouraging people to work, yikes. Then there's that whole income cliff thing, right?
Yeah, where people might actually be worse off if they earn more because they lose other benefits. It creates this weird disincentive to, actually improve your financial situation. Makes you dependent on the system.
It's a trap, almost. And then there's the whole social perception, isn't there? Like, what does it say about our values if we just hand out money without any expectation of work?
Exactly. That Wisconsin advisory question, where most voters said able-bodied adults should have to look for work to get benefits, that speaks volumes. People aren't really on board with unconditional handouts, it seems.
Yeah, they want to see effort, some kind of reciprocity, It's a complex issue for sure, lots to unpack, but these recent findings, they're definitely food for thought.
So, it looks like accuracy and dependability are really key for this news organization, right?
Yeah, definitely. They're emphasizing thoroughness too, which, with so much misinformation out there these days, it's more important than ever.
Totally. And they have a strict policy against plagiarism, which honestly should be a given, but.
Sadly, not always the case. Good on them for being explicit about it, though. It builds trust, and it protects their credibility.
For sure. And I see they're following the DNPA Code of Ethics, which, that's a pretty established standard, right?
Yeah, it's a solid framework for ethical journalism. It covers everything from accuracy and fairness to accountability and transparency. A good sign they take these things seriously.
Right? And I like that they're actively encouraging feedback. Contact us if you see anything inaccurate. That shows they're open to correction, willing to be held accountable.
Definitely. It's not just about publishing information, it's about maintaining its integrity, and that requires ongoing effort. Being responsive to reader input, fact-checking, all of that.
Absolutely. And it's smart, strategically. It builds trust with the audience. Shows they're not just, putting stuff out there and forgetting about it. They actually care about getting it right.
Yeah, exactly. It shows they value their readers and, well, the truth, which, let's be honest, is refreshing in today's media landscape. It's a commitment to quality and, to continuous improvement. And that's what really matters in the long run.